Hello, this is Unsung, and I'm currently the number 1 Samira in NA. Samira has always been a popular champion since her release, and with the constant meta adjustments, she's gaining quite a bit of popularity as an AD carry. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing the 10 most important tips that I can with you to help you learn this champ. If you have any other questions, I stream Monday through Friday at twitch.tv/unsungpts, and this YouTube channel is chock full of important Samira-related content to help you learn, so please drop a sub. Anyways, let's go ahead and dive straight into this video, starting off with tip number 1. So the first tip that we're going to begin the video with is the Q flash. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. The Q flash basically allows you to instantly cast your Q and then flash forward to gain yourself a little bit of extra range and to cut down on your animation time. It's very visually confusing to somebody when you're sitting out of range like so. They're exactly one shot and you start casting your Q. It makes it look like it's going to whiff, but if you flash at the very tail end of the cast bar, it will actually auto-update your location and thus give you a range extension. This is really useful for picking people off at the very edges of fights, and is fantastic for getting surprise amounts of damage onto enemy AD carries, especially during the lane phase. Now, this is for the ranged Q. Tip number 2 is going to be the melee Q flash. Now, this one works a little bit differently compared to the Q flash. The Q flash will remember the initial cast location, so if you Q and then you flash, it will go towards your cursor every single time. The melee Q works a little bit differently. Melee Q flash is its own separate tip because it has completely different mechanics. We can, of course, simply use our Q and then flash into our opponent like so, thus applying our passive and our melee Q's effect, right? However, what we can also do is completely turn this 180 degrees. This is really useful for when you're trying to pick somebody in a fight or you need lifesteal from a gigantic portion of minions. All you simply need to do is start your Q on a target in melee range, like so, and then you flash the opposite direction. Instead of remembering where you cast from, like the original Q flash, it will update its cast location to where you're facing after your flash. Thus, you can always redirect your melee Q in whatever direction you specify based off of your flash location. This is incredibly useful for these really clutch plays and is amazing during the lane phase. Let's say somebody's in a creep wave and you want to flash forward and kill them. You simply Q off of the melee creeps in the front of the wave, flash the Q on top of them, go for an additional auto, and then you can reset through the wave and get back out. This is incredibly useful during the lane. Let's go ahead and demonstrate this real quick. So let's say that we're sitting really low in the lane phase of the game. There's an enemy AD carry sitting on this side of the wave, and we can't land a Q directly on them. What we can do is start our melee Q, flash forward, land our auto attack, E back through the wave, we're instantly out. This is incredibly useful when you're diving turrets, when you're trying to kill people in base, when somebody's body blocking you, let's say you have a Braum or something in front of your face. The uses of this are basically going to be only limited by your creativity. Next up we have tip number 3, and this is going to be another mechanic with our flash. So as you know, the melee Q flash you can completely change the direction of, even up to 180 degrees. The regular Q flash simply gives you additional range. Now there is one other Q flash variant that is incredibly important. I'm going to post a little bit of a clip to show you just how useful this is. So the EQ flash is going to basically move all of your damage from your E and your Q onto a completely different location while making it look like you're only going one way. This is very strict on the timing and quite hard to pull off if you don't know what to expect. So let's go ahead and explain this a little bit. Your EQ, when you use it, drops a little sash of explosives behind you. However, that location of the sash is constantly updating as you're traveling. This means that you can actually move your entire sash and your E's damage onto an enemy target without actually having to target them initially. Your E actually has its own separate hitbox in its entirety, and then the same thing goes for your EQ. As you can see, all of this damage adds up as we touch the target, like so. So when we add 3 together, we have 3 different damage pop-ups. If we just hit the E, and then we flash into opponent, there's only 2. So we can verify that we're getting the full EQ, plus the passive damage pop-up. This will let you know that you've done it right. EQ flash is incredibly useful for picking people, especially during team fights. Let's say that you have a frontline tank directly in front of you, and you want to instantly one-shot somebody in the backline. You can very easily do this by doing EQ, flash, auto, W, and then we auto again. Now next up is going to be tip number 4, and this is more of a general mobility tip. So Samira is actually quite mobile if you're able to make the most out of her static dash range. Even though the dash range is completely static, we can actually do a couple of little crazy things with it. If a static dash will put you basically over the halfway point of a wall, you can go completely over a wall even if it's slightly out of your range. This works off of Gromp, this works off of Wolves, this works off of Drake even in some circumstances. You get the idea. We can essentially use this to get in and out of very sticky situations without having to worry about using our flash. If there is a champion that is positioned near a wall, we can actually use that to our advantage. We can even use Scuttle Crab to corral itself towards walls, so we can get over without having to commit a very long cooldown. This is incredibly useful for playing around certain locations, such as Drake Pit, where you're going to need that mobility to get in and out of a fight. So, we can get over any wall as long as the very tip point of our dash is basically halfway over any terrain. Here's another example. Now next up we have tip number 5, and this is something that will really help you in these really long-ranged matchups. So if you're playing against a champion like Caitlyn, or something that has longer range than you, especially during the lane phase, it's quite difficult to directly E on top of them because they can see you walking towards them, right? Your E's range is of course slightly longer than your auto attack's range, but it's very, very telegraphed when you want to walk up and actually use your E on somebody. A great way to bypass how telegraphed this is by simply not Eing onto somebody directly. This person is currently out of our E range, as you can see here. However, our E range is also extended by our champion's hitbox, meaning that we can get our E's damage directly onto this champion without having to actually click onto them. This means that we can very easily surprise them by dashing off of a creep like so, and getting up in their face for our additional style stack. If you combine this with your EQ, you can get some really beefy range out of this and instantly stack your ulti if you know what to look for. This is incredibly useful in matchups where you are outranged, such as Caitlyn, Ashe, Varus, Kalista, you get the idea. Any champion that outranges you, you can completely and utterly dismantle them by simply using this. If you're against a high mobility champion, they're not really going to be reacting to you dashing off of the creep instead of you walking towards them and dashing directly onto them, right? So this is a great way to surprise somebody and to catch them with their pants down. I would only really do this when you're completely confident that you're able to win the 1v1 once you're actually on top of somebody, but in matchups like Caitlyn, this is incredibly important because we can simply EQ off of a creep like so, and then we can auto W and block the net instantly to get our ulti as soon as possible. Next up we have tip number 6, which is going to be how we want to be using our E to escape. So as you all know, Samira had her allied E removed very early on in her release. This is one of the biggest nerfs that Samira has ever received. However, it doesn't really put a damper on her escape potential too much if you know how to bypass it. So, the most obvious way to get around this issue is by simply walking behind somebody like so and then Eing backwards through them. Sure, you lose a little bit of distance, but overall your E will create more space between you and your opponent than walking away will. So next time you get ganked by a jungler, instead of trying to run away immediately, try to run into them, so that way you can E backwards through them and thus get away. If you're able to get an auto attack off beforehand, and you can go for auto EQ, and then you auto one more time, you're going to have too much movement speed for them to be able to catch you, thanks to your style stacks. This is incredibly useful for getting away from really fast champions, and from things that have no gap closers. Olaf is very easy to deal with for this reason. We simply walk into him, and then we can EQ away. When he throws an axe, we can block it, and then we can get out scot-free. This is incredibly useful for the lane phase of the game, especially if you're going for a tower dive or something similar. Generally, if an Alistar wants to engage on you and they Q flash, they're always going to walk behind you, so you can simply E through them and ignore that engage completely. Next up we have tip number 7, which is going to be the fast combo. The fastest way to get your style stacks on this champion is going to be auto near melee range, but basically inside of your W range, like so. W, E, Q, auto, and then your W will strike twice. So, auto, W, E, Q, auto. We're completely stacked on our style stacks, and we're able to get off our ulti instantly. This is a very high risk and very spacing demanding combo, but once you get the hang of it, this is one of the most useful things that you could potentially be doing on this champion. So once again, auto, W, E, Q, auto, and then we can instantly use our ultimate. This is incredibly quick, and will allow you to assassinate people basically before they're able to react. Now next up for tip number 8, I have another little tip with the EQ. So, this is something that not a lot of Samira players know about. This is really hidden tech, and one of the most important things I could teach to any Samira player. Basically, while you're in your W, you cannot auto attack, as you can see here, unless you use your EQ. So if we auto EQ and then we go right here, you can see that we actually get a full auto attack out, which allows us to, of course, increase our DPS while our W is going. Normally, the drawback to using your W is that you don't have extra damage, but if we end up using this technique, then we're able to get a huge amount of damage onto our targets without having to deal with that much drawback. Of course, this puts all of your stuff on cooldown, and it's quite risky to use if you end up messing it up, but that's why we don't mess it up, right? So once again, we can auto, W, EQ, and then auto directly. One more time, we'll W and try to auto attack. we can't auto attack no matter what until the W animation ends, but if we use this little tip and we W EQ, then we can get an auto attack off instantly. One more time, W, EQ, and you can see the auto attack go off. Samira physically shoots her handgun. Now, you can actually do this during your ulti as well. This is very, very useful. So, as you can see, we ult, I'm auto attacking, no auto is coming out until afterwards, right? But if we use this technique, we can ulti, use EQ, and you could see an additional auto attack comes through. Samira slashes with her sword. This is incredibly important for assassinating targets, especially later on into the game. Next up, we have tip number 9, which is going to be using your style stacks for positioning instead of for damage. So when you play Samira, it's quite common where you actually like get on top of somebody and then you get gassed. You get kited out, right? The only way that you can combat this is by simply holding onto your ult. Your ulti is a win more button. It's not an instant win button, right? If you're already winning a fight, then it is an incredibly strong tool. However, if somebody's on equal footing with you or you're behind, you don't generally want to use this every single time. In matchups like Kai'Sa can actually ulti out of your ulti's range just slightly so you're not able to hit her, and then the self-slow from your ulti will prevent you from catching her. Thus, she'll be able to kite you out and get away from you. However, this situation never arises if we simply hold on to our style stacks. Then we can weave auto attacks, get as close to Kai'Sa as possible, force her ulti without having to use ours, and then once she uses hers, then we can drop ours when she's as good as dead. This is very important for a lot of matchups for Samira. If you're against things that have a lot of mobility, you don't want to be slowing yourself before you can actually deal full damage to them. The easiest way to do this is by simply holding onto your style stacks. And finally, last but not least, we have tip number 10, which is going to be holding onto your ulti until after crowd control. Generally, Samira is a front-loaded champion, right? This means that it takes time for you to get to your style stacks, and then once you're there, you generally don't get your passive again unless you get a reset. You need your E and your Q to be able to constantly funnel yourself style stacks, right? Your W is one of your most important tools because it gives you 3 stacks of your style if you end up using it correctly, right? This is really, really important. So basically when our W is on cooldown, it's really hard for us to generate enough stacks to use our ult. I see a lot of players make this mistake all the time, and they're basically just using their ulti before the crowd control that they need, dodge, has been used. If we go in on an Alistar, we simply do too much damage, he's going to have to crowd control us, right? If we use our ulti, then it's even better for him to get that usage of his Q off, right? It's worth more. However, if we hold the ulti and we force him into a stalemate position, he will have to CC us anyways in order to stop all the damage coming through. And then once it's down, we can freely use our ulti and it cannot be cancelled. You use your ulti when you can splash damage onto multiple targets, or you want to use it where you're not going to be able to auto attack quickly enough. Right? If you're against a Jax E, for example, your ulti will counter the E, so you have to make sure that you're using this at the correct times so you're getting the full value out of your ultimate. Remember, we're kind of front-loaded in how we get our ulti unless we get a reset, so that first ulti matters the most in every single fight. Now that we covered the 10 most important Samira tips, let's go ahead and go over some added bonus ones that I didn't feel were as important but still belong in this video. Our bonus tip number 1 is going to be, when you want healing on Samira, it's better to E and then auto Q. This is due to how Samira's Q actually works with lifesteal. Instead of using EQ, we want to E auto Q, so that way we're getting more value out of our lifesteal. EQ auto will basically rear-load our lifesteal onto that auto attack and we get less from it, purely due to the fact that Samira's Q actually has a reduced healing modifier. This only applies lifesteal at 66%, which is quite important when you think about it, right? Because if we're healing for 100 with our regular auto attacks, we only heal for 66.6 with our Q. Now, if we use EQ, this will actually hit multiple targets if they're all stacked up together, right? But the range of this is quite thin. It's very easy to miss a target with your EQ and thus not get full value out of your lifesteal. But if we E auto Q, like so, the splash will allow us to hit more targets at once, and we can get a full lifesteal auto attack earlier on in the fight. So that way we're not having to deal with the nerfed value. This is really important for survivability, especially when you're fighting in like the enemy base. There are times where I will straight up stop hitting the enemy champion to land a Q on like 5 creeps and then heal back to full when I have Bloodthirster. This is really, really important for being more durable in team fights. And finally, we have bonus tip number 2, which is going to be using your E on structures. So this is actually written into Samira's kit, but not too many people know about it. You can straight up E off of structures. Now, this doesn't seem super useful, but it's useful for, of course, landing your EQ off of a structure and then like going for somebody. But most importantly, during the lane phase, this will actually give you attack speed. So the most common way for me to go for plates in the early game is by auto attacking like so, taking a step towards the tower, trying to get behind it like so, getting into sword range, then using auto E and thus gaining my attack speed while not putting myself deeper in on the tower range, right? If I were to E in here, I'd be melee range of the tower. However, if I were to auto E, if somebody comes this way, then I can of course walk away before they jump on me. This is very, very, very useful and something that I use every single game that not too many Samira players know about. You should abuse this to get that extra plate money. That 1 or 2 extra auto attacks that you land from having your increased attack speed from your E will matter in the long run 100%. Anyways, thank you all for watching this tips video. Make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe so that you can support me in the channel. Thank you guys all for watching and hope you all have a wonderful day. I'll see you all in the next one.